Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football Preview Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Samuel Rooke and Jeremy Smith. It's the last weekend of the season, with the final match day coming before the winter break will be on a midweek. So let's make the most before a barren 2-week spell where we might actually have to talk to people about something other than French football. I shudder at the thought. But before previewing the upcoming action, here is the news from the midweek Coupe de la Ligue football. Toulouse continued their recent return to form with a 2-0 win over struggling Bordeaux, with Max-Alain Gradel scoring from the spot for the second time in a week, while Monaco hero Guido Carrillo scored again as last year's finalists beat Caen by the same scoreline, which also included a fabulous goal from over 50 yards from Radamel Falcao. Angers have Angelo Fulgini to thank as they snuck past Metz by a single goal, as Rennes eventually saw off a stubborn Marseille on penalties after the game finished 2-2. Paris Saint-Germain exercised some revenge on Strasbourg as they ran out 4-2 winners at the Stade de la Méno, while Nice needed to rely on spot kicks themselves after drawing 1-1 with Lille. Amiens saw off the final Ligue 2 side Tours with a 2-1 victory, as Montpellier provided the surprise of the round as they won 4-1 at home to knock out a stunned Lyon. The quarter-final draw has a pick of a match in the Côte d'Azur derby between Nice and Monaco. The other fixtures see Amiens host PSG, Montpellier travel to Angers, and Rennes face Toulouse. In off-the-field news, the DNCG has suspended Lille from the January transfer window due to financial irregularities. Some sources are stating the situation is so dire that the club may be relegated at the end of the season, while the club may be forced to hold on to maligned manager Marcelo Bielsa as he's demanding a €9.5 million payout. Strasbourg have been given the go-ahead to expand their stadium from 26,000 to 32,000 fans, a move which could cost up to €100 million and should be complete by 2022. And finally, the LFP have voted in favour of VAR to be actioned in Ligue 1 next season. That would be for goals, straight red cards, mistaken identity, and penalties. But this does not confirm its usage next season just yet, seeing as the IFAB could, and not necessarily would, invalidate it as they are the only body able to make formal changes in football. And that's all for now, but for all your latest news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. So let's dive into the weekend straight away. And the first one on the docket this evening is Friday night's game between Saint-Etienne and Monaco. And I want to focus on the hosts first, Sam. We talked on Monday's pod, myself and Adam, about it being a pretty horrendous time for Saint-Etienne at the moment. They've won 1 of their last 10 games, and that's apologies for Jez on this one, but a misnomer in the fact it was Metz they beat in that one victory. This is not the kind of game that they want to play to try and bounce back after what has been a really, really awful run since that, especially since that derby defeat to Lyon.
Yeah, I mean, things have gone from bad to worse for Saint-Etienne since that derby defeat, as you mentioned. I mean, arguably, this wasn't the defeat to Marseille wasn't worse because it wasn't a derby, but it was pretty embarrassing. It was pretty much just dropping tools and really just almost giving up. And you really worry against the Monaco side, who are kind of coming out of their little slump. You think, well, this is a perfect opportunity for Monaco to savage someone and really get back into form ahead of the break. And Saint-Etienne, this game really just comes at a bad time. You really want to be facing Metz again, to be honest.
I think you would concur with that, really, Jessamine, at the moment. But let's focus on Ligue. I don't want to slam your team a little bit too much, but they've just looked particularly ordinary. I mean, we mentioned as well that a lot of times on this show and several other shows that Christophe Galtier's time at the club felt like it was coming to a natural end. But was that maybe wishful thinking? I mean, if anything, the strong point of this team was always their defence, and now that's starting to go backwards, especially with Loic Perrin facing a spell on the sidelines.
I think in Perrin's case, I mean, He's becoming. I think he's starting maybe to show his age a little bit, getting a little bit injury prone. And any team that doesn't have a very consistent starting back four, I think is always going to struggle a little bit. But they're just. You look on paper at the team they've got, and yeah, they've had a few injuries as they always seem to do, and a couple of weird issues like Bamba being dropped for a couple of games earlier on this season because of the sort of dispute over the new contract and new salary that he wanted. But on paper, it's still, if not the most exciting team in the league, certainly one that shouldn't be sort of in free fall as it is at the moment. Dione, he was one player that we were all kind of excited about the way he was playing last season. Thought was an excellent signing for Saint-Etienne, who seemed to have lacked a real goal scorer for a long time, but that hasn't clicked at all. And I think that they're being affected quite a lot by off the pitch issues. There just seems to be so many people in the background that have got different little pockets of power, and it's not particularly clear who's in charge of what. And I think that possibly did for Oscar Garcia. I think he'd had enough of. I can't remember if it was Romael Caiazzo sort of butting in and trying to get involved in the playing side. So I think that was one of the reasons he left. I think Sablé is probably not an ideal replacement in anyone's eyes, but probably a similar reason. He's probably there because, almost like weird analogy, but when John Major became Prime Minister here, just because he was the least offensive option for everyone rather than someone that everyone wanted. And, it's nothing particularly against him. He doesn't have his badges. He hasn't done the right sort of qualifications. And I think he's probably a bit out of his depth. And something needs to change there quickly to stop the rot.
Yeah, there's a real worry that they're starting to spiral out of control. I mean, they're not far off the drop zone now. I mean, they're only 2 points in front of Lille, who currently occupy that playoff place, and Angers are only 5 points behind, which at this stage of the season, when you're in free fall, it is a little bit of a worry. But they face a team, Sam, in Monaco, that are slowly but surely getting a little bit better over the last couple of weeks. Sort of after they've got the Champions League almost out of the way, they've slowly sort of built from there. But one player I want to talk about in particular, who has impressed sort of over the last month or so, and he scored twice last week, and he scored midweek as well, and that's Guido Carrillo. They've really struggled for goals in that sort of barren spell, even though Falcao had an excellent start of the season. Is there a real argument to try him from the start, with the fact that Keita Balde's not set the world alight and Jovetic is in and out of the team through injury as well? If they want to try and play in 4-4-2, is he maybe the answer?
I mean, I think he probably is. Yeah, I mean, we said earlier in the season Falcao's goals were papering over problems that they had. He was just scoring at such a ridiculous rate that even though Monaco themselves weren't playing particularly well, they were winning games and they were still very much up there. When Falcao stopped scoring at quite such a clip, things started to look very, very average. But I mean, Carrillo, obviously, those goals in a miraculous win last weekend, that was just fantastic. But you think perhaps he could be the answer. I mean, he's only got 4 goals, though, this season. He's not exactly prolific, but it's all about finding the right person to get the most out of Falcao, because he is far and away the most important player to this team as it stands. If Falcao can score and if Carrillo can help him score, then that's what you want. And he has looked good in his opportunities. He hasn't maybe had so many. Other players, like you mentioned, Keita Balde, Jovetic as well, they perhaps get more opportunities. They are bigger names and probably more talented, but it's not really so much about talent. I mean, if Carrillo can be the Valère Germain to this version of Monaco, then so much the better. It doesn't matter if he's not a particularly flashy player, but if he can make things happen for the more talented players around him, then that's the solution for Monaco going forward.
Yeah, these next 2 games, really, if they play Saint-Etienne away on Friday and they play Rennes in that sort of weird everyone plays on Wednesday winter game that we're getting later this week, Jez. But this is a really important game for them, and both those games, because now they're level on points with Marseille and Lyon. There's a real scrap for that second place, looking like it might go into the second half of the season. That might be the narrative with Paris Saint-Germain seemingly going to pull away. it's vital that they, especially when they face a team in other years, you would have said a game at Ligue, the Geoffrey Guichard will be a difficult away trip. But this is a great opportunity to pick up 3 points in what would have previously proven to be a difficult game, especially as Lyon and Marseille are playing each other as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at least one of those two teams are going to drop points, so it's a huge match for Monaco to try to sort of steal at least 2 points advantage over one of them. And yeah, I mean, you look at, you mentioned that Saint-Etienne's only win recently has been against Metz. I mean, you could look at it the other way as well. Bordeaux have been in terrible form, and their only win recently has been against Saint-Etienne. So, they Metz aside, they do seem like one of those teams that are there for the taking at the moment. I mean, Geoffrey Guichard is always a difficult place to go to as long as the fans are behind Saint-Etienne. You get the feeling if Monaco would score early, it could get quite sort of X-rated. If Saint-Etienne score early, or at least do some good things early and really get the crowd behind them, I don't think it will be a formality for Monaco, but they have to start as favourites, and it's a huge opportunity for them. And even though they're at home in the last game, I'd say home to Rennes. On paper, Rennes are a little bit better recently. I'd say that's a harder match than away to Saint-Etienne. So I think it's crucial that if they want to finish this half of the season, kind of, I guess, making a statement or setting themselves up well for the second half, then I think they need to be winning at Saint-Etienne.
Yeah, Rennes a bit of a funny game, really, to be fair. They seem to play up to any team that's better than them and play down to anyone that's sort of below what they perceived level is, at least. And they might at least hope that Paris Saint-Germain might soften them up with a good result at the weekend as well. But let's get some predictions. I'll go with you, Sam. What are you predicting in this one?
Well, I was surprised to learn that Saint-Etienne are Monaco's sort of bête noire historically. They're the team with the worst record for Monaco in history. But I don't imagine that that's going to continue this week. I think Monaco are going to win and win it probably quite comfortably. I'm going to say 4-0 to Monaco.
Jez?
I'll go 3-1 Monaco.
This feels like one of the results that Monaco seem to get this season, and that's 2-0. And possibly maybe something from Falcao again. It was a great goal in midweek. It's not. There's been a lot of goals seemingly scored from distance in a number of different leagues. That's not the best one, I would say. I still think Fekir's is probably the best that we've seen at any level, at any division so far this season. But that was still a very nice little goal. That nice to see the Colombians starting to get back on the score sheet as well. On to a really interesting game on Saturday, because we want to talk about one team in particular first, and that will be Lille, who face Dijon, who have been in decent form but did lose pretty heavily against Guingamp last time out. But as we mentioned in the news, really, Sam, Lille have a lot of problems off the field now, where they're not going to be able to buy anyone in January now, which is a major issue. There's reports that they have a big bill to pay that they need to show for before possibly the NCG might relegate them at the end of the season. That'll be hanging over them now for a long time until that's resolved. And now the Bielsa situation is getting more complex because they might not be able to even afford to let him go unless he decides to walk or something of that, which is highly unlikely as well. It gets trickier and trickier and trickier down there at the moment, doesn't it?
We talk a lot about football teams having a nightmare season, but if you think about where Lille were in the summer, Bielsa's in, we've got money, we're buying players, we're buying these exciting young Brazilians, we're making lots of changes, everything's happening. Lille are on the up. Lille are coming back. This is going to be Lille's time again. From that to where we are now, to all those problems you've just described, I mean, this really must feel like a nightmare. For the supporters, it must really feel like that summer that feels years ago now. And it's just hit after hit. And even just as they were starting to show a little bit, they were starting to come out of that terrible form. They beat Lyon, they beat Toulouse, they were frustratingly poor against PSG. But even there were still some of those green shoots that we've talked about so often on this show, that Lille have shown progress. And then just as they seem to be coming out again of this nightmare, it's right back into it, and it's worse than ever. I mean, it seemed like maybe they were going to push their way out of the relegation zone, and then they could be pulled back into relegation by off-field matters. It really is a nightmare.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Their form sort of recently has been sort of flowing, at least compared to what it was just a complete downturn in recent terms. But and I bet that for one thing, I'm thinking Marseille fans must be absolutely delighted that they didn't get Gerard Lopez, because it seems like he was the bum deal when Frank McCourt was the one that everyone was worried about with the issues in the US, and him holding a baseball team and having issues there. But is there a way out for this, Jeremy? I mean, you must think that this must weigh pretty heavily on the players, and especially just before a winter break. I mean, some of them will be praying that they can jump ship, surely, won't they?
They could do. It'd be interesting to know whether it's the sort of current first team squad that thinks they can, or the players that have been the stalwarts of Lille the last few years that Bielsa sort of chucked by the wayside, and are kind of still waiting in the wings. As Enyama is just coming back from a bad injury, but there's a few, very decent, very experienced players sort of twiddling their thumbs in the background. If it came down to it, I still think they've got the enough there, especially when you consider that Metz are pretty much dead and buried. There's enough there that I think they could and should be safe. I still don't think they've got a decent striker. That's I'd say their main concern. But there's still enough of a squad there to keep them up. But yeah, I think everything they did in the summer was very messy. I think it was very dangerous to put all their eggs in the Bielsa basket, to give him as much. I know that he's the kind of person who thrives on being able to control everything, but I think they probably bent over a little bit too much for him, for someone who is every hipster's favourite manager, and certainly a lot of the best managers around seem to have learned from him, but his own personal record has never been particularly great, and certainly the way that he often leaves clubs in the lurch isn't ideal either. So I think Lille were always risking a lot by, down to things like, building special bungalows and huts around the training ground because he insisted on it, and things like that. And clearly that from what they've announced this week, I think there's obviously more there than we even thought in the first place. But if it's just in terms of playing matters, I think they should have enough about them to stay up. But yeah, if it comes to that decision, or whether they stay up or not, being taken away from the players themselves and just being based on accounts in the boardroom, then I suppose you have to say Lille surely have only got themselves to blame, because they should have been keeping on top of that.
And I mean, if you're a player, though, you start now worrying if there's threats from the DNCG. You start worrying, well, is this going to affect my paycheck sooner rather than later? Is it going to affect my possibility of earning for my family, and the people around me start losing their jobs and bits like that? Is that where this sort of trails off? I do really worry for
the way some of their players have been playing. They should be grateful they've had a paycheck up till now.
That's a good point. And it's this amalgamation of a lot of teams sort of from 23 points downwards at the moment that you could all argue are possibly still not in a fight for it, at least. But you look at some of those teams, I mean, near the bottom at the moment, Angers have a good talent level. Lille do, Saint-Etienne, Toulouse, Bordeaux, they've all got talented players, but they're all stuck in that mire. I just feel someone's going to be sucked into that vortex at the moment of the sort of teams like Troyes and Dijon and Strasbourg and Amiens all performing relatively well, as sort of suffocated these teams that should be doing a lot better, and has really made them struggle. And I fear that, especially come this point that we're sort of on the cusp of the midpoint of the season, some of these teams might be really sucked in there deeper if it wasn't for Metz being so dire in terms of points wise. It might be even more of a worry really for some of these teams. But they take on a team that they should, at least on paper, feel like they should be beating, but a team that's full of players that probably want to beat them, in the likes of Xhaka and Sleety as well, who were sort of cast aside by Bielsa and joined Dijon. They've been good of late. We've mentioned a few times, Sam, that they've sort of picked up a head of steam, but the loss at Guingamp may be excused by the early red card. It was definitely a red card, but that's sort of what's led to the sort of 4-0 thumping they faced. But this is an ideal opportunity for them to get back on the horse, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about everyone wants to play Metz, but at this point, arguably, with all the problems on and off the pitch, probably everyone wants to play Lille just a little bit. I mean, Dijon are a really good side at home. They win games at home. They're one of the better teams in the league. I think they're a top 6 team on home form. And you're playing a team that don't travel particularly well. I mean, they don't play particularly well at home either, but Lille don't travel particularly well. They don't. They're not really a team that you expect to put Dijon under a whole lot of pressure. Thiago Maia is probably going to miss the game for Lille as well, and we know that when he doesn't play, Lille almost always don't win. So that's just another point in Dijon's favour, and they're just floating along. They've done really well. I mean, as you've mentioned, Gangon, that was the exception. You get a red card that early, heads go down. That's frustrating. I mean, Metz showed against Toulouse, you can lose a man early and still fight on, and they did ably, and that was very impressive. And Dijon didn't do that, and that'll be disappointing. That you can lose a game away with 10 men, fine, but you don't have to collapse in the way that they did. So that is problematic, but perhaps that just sort of helps sharpen things up on the training ground. They didn't have a midweek cup game, so they'll be nice and fresh. They'll be ready to go, and this is a game that they'll really, really want to win this, because that will just lift them really far away from relegation and leave them 6 points clear of the drop zone if they win this one, and that's just lovely place to be for Dijon at this point in the season.
Yeah, I also think the red card as well, it definitely a red card, but at the same time, this team plays on such an attacking edge rather than a defensive edge than a lot of teams in the lower half of Ligue, and that losing a player can sort of completely derail their styling almost. I think even though they have improved defensively, I don't think this is the kind of team that can sort of shut up shop and hope for the best and sort of see out opponents for 80 minutes. I don't think that is quite the team to do that. But saying that, Jez, with a full complement of 11 players this time, at least, hopefully for more than 12 minutes, they should be really a side with, Lille have not the greatest defensive record at the moment. There's a lot of questions about their centre-backs as well, and their full-backs regularly being someone like Thiago Maia, who'll be missing. This is a possibility that they could maybe, questionably, sort of rack up the goal difference a little bit if they really are playing on song.
I think they've definitely got the capability to. I mean, they've won their last 4 at home, which by any standards is a good run. And they're really good fun to watch. Like, you're going to get goals one way or the other when they're playing. They rarely shut up shop. They generally go for it, which sometimes works to their disadvantage. But at least it's fun to watch. And at home, with the crowd behind them, against a team who, where they probably feel that they can afford to be even more gung ho because they're probably not too worried about what's gonna happen if and when they lose the ball. I agree. I think it could. They could come out very clear winners in this one.
Yeah, and if there's a game you want to watch in the multiplex this weekend, Dijon have in the last 5 games, they've had at least 3 goals in every single one of those games. 4 of those 5 games have at least 4 goals as well. So if you want action, watch Dijon. But let's get a prediction on this one. I'll start with you, Jez. What do you think the result will be?
I was tempted to say that they'll sort of cancel out the Gangon one and say 4-0, but I'll go 3-0. But I think they'll be comfortable winners.
Sam?
I think this might be an opportunity for Lille to show a bit of fight, and I don't think they're going to win, but I think maybe 1-0 to Dijon.
I think it'll be a 3-1 to Dijon. They never tend to hold out. They've not had many clean sheets this season, so let's hope that the Lille, at least after this game, and maybe recoup something in January and can get back on the focus, because we never want to see teams go down because of financial difficulties, because we have seen how that's changed for teams like Bastia and Evian in recent memory as well. Let's hope that they can get out of that mire a bit. But let's talk about a team now in an interesting game that have succeeded in the last couple of weeks fantastically as well. And I think we should highlight them a little bit more, really, because I don't think we've really complimented them enough. And that's Strasbourg. We mentioned the week before about Paris Saint-Germain's failings, and then last week on Monday we had a big pop at Bordeaux for a long while. So let's focus on this team, Sam, who have pulled out 2 fantastic results in Ligue in the last 2 weeks. I think even the 2-1 or the 2-1 win against Paris Saint-Germain was good, but the 3-0 win against Bordeaux was possibly even better. You can maybe forgive them the 4-2 defeat in midweek in the Coupe de Ligue to Paris Saint-Germain as well. They've maybe exacted some revenge there, but we mentioned that this team is starting to figure out how to play in Ligue 1, but more than that now, they're learning how to win as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the PSG game midweek, you can't excuse them a lot. It was a rotated side. A lot of the sort of mainstays of this Strasbourg team didn't play. And I don't think they'll be that bothered, really. I mean, obviously, their goal this season is survival. And the way they've been playing in the last few weeks, you have to think that that's very, very much something within their capabilities. I mean, the PSG game, just unbelievable. But then, yeah, against Bordeaux, that was a performance of a slick senior Ligue 1 side that was not promoted side fumbling about and maybe getting a lucky win away at a big French team. That was a very serious performance and highlighted by that goal from Martin Terrier, just sensational. And he's been someone that's been talked about as a coming player for such a long time, and it's great to see him making an impact. He got an assist in that game as well, and he just looks a fabulous young player. And this Strasbourg team, I mean, they're flying. I think 6th in the form table, well away from relegation at the moment, and just fantastic to watch.
Yeah, and looking back at the sort of, I remember the sort of sparkling moment for a lot of us was that Marseille game back in early October, mid-October actually. They've only lost once since then. It was a weird sort of anomaly, 3-0 loss to Troyes. Since then, they beat Nice away from home. They drew with Angers, beat Rennes, drew with Saint-Etienne in a weird game again. 0-0 draw against Caen, who were doing really well. And then the 2 victories that they've picked up recently. They've got some interesting talent as well, Jez. I mean, Sam pointed out Martin Terrier there, who got his goal deservedly at the weekend, but Nuno da Costa's come up with a couple of goals. Stefan Bayer-Hoeken has scored 2 important goals in those big games. We all like the transfer of Jonas Martin in the summer, and Dimitri Leonard is popping up here, there, and everywhere as well, the one who's followed them all the way from the National as well. They've got some serious talent now that are starting to really mould themselves in Liga.
Yeah, I think they've got a really nice balance of youth and experience. Of they've got a few players that have excuse me, that do have Ligue 1 experience, especially in the back line. You've got players like Lala, Morgan, and Kone, who, at Lyon a lot of the time people kind of joked about how accident prone he was, but generally he's been very good for Strasbourg. Liena and Grimm, who are coming up with some fantastic long range efforts and some, good set piece work as well. And then they've got Balkan, who's come from a failed loan period at Saint-Etienne to now be scoring brilliant winners against PSG, so it's working out well for him. And Terrier, we just talked about Lille's struggles, particularly up front. He's on loan from Lille, and I think they could really do with him at the moment. He looks fantastic, and he's been great for France under 21s this season as well. It's not just for Strasbourg, but as much as Jovanovic and Toulanon sort of kind of acted like the Red Sea and just opened up for him to power past him the other day. Still, the confidence and the poise to chest it down from his own area and sprint through like that and finish well as well. It kind of sums up the whole team. They're playing with a lot of confidence, and a little bit like Dijon at the start of the season. It looked like they were going to be playing some good football, but maybe conceding a few too many. But they were going to score, but it looked like they were going to concede more than they'd put away. But yeah, certainly in the last month or 6 weeks or so, even 2 months, they seem to have worked it out. And also, considering how far back they've come from, and the great support that they get at the Menor, I don't think many people, even possibly Metz and Nossi fans, would begrudge them, staying up the way they're doing it.
Yeah, and you look at the. I've really liked how Kudja's come in with Kamara injured as well. He's had a good game and a half in 2 very big games. You mentioned Lala there as well. I think he's had a fantastic season so far as well. The fullback as well, he's been excellent. And then, like you say, a lot of people, when you see the fans and the reaction that they got in those, especially in that Paris Saint-Germain game, they were absolutely fantastic. Then they were great against Marseille as well. The fact that they are able to possibly expand their stadium to 32,000 come 2022, you start thinking that this could be a club that could quite easily sort of seat itself as a permanent fixture in Ligue, and who would complain really when their possibility of their following and the football they're playing, that what they can possibly make it is really positive. It's great to see a French club. We often see a lot of teams come from Ligue 2 and they're either former Ligue 1 clubs and sort of struggle, or they are Ligue 2 clubs that are maybe playing a level above where they should naturally be. Let's say they sort of skipped a step in some sense, and they struggle to really hold on to their Ligue 1 status. But this feels like a club that has a plan and has an idea, and it felt like that in the summer as well with the transfers that we're making. The hope is that they can, if they can continue and stay up and then establish themselves a little bit more. It'd be great to see, because we don't see it as often as we maybe should do in Ligue 1. But they face a team that's just come out of a real stink, really, in a way. Sam, Toulouse in the last couple of weeks have got a couple of wins finally under their belt. They beat Bordeaux in midweek, and they beat Caen as well, who've been relatively decent. But before that, they were really kicking up a fuss. I mean, they lost their last sort of 5 games. Yes, they'd nicked a couple of wins before that, but it was against an Amiens side that was struggling then in early October, and an Angers side that are struggling now as well. Do they feel like they're finally starting to turn a corner, and because they're finding the back of the net, and that's again relieving the pressure on that defence that had sort of bent a little bit in the last couple of weeks?
I hope so, but I'm not yet convinced. I think two results. One, a cup game, which we know you can't take so much from that, and as you also mentioned earlier, Maxime Gradel, 2 penalties, which have been very important to these games. I mean, yes, you have to convert them, but it's perhaps not quite the same as Toulouse finding their feet, scoring goals a bit more freely, which is obviously what has been their problem. They're never a team that scores a lot, but they just needed to score some. And 4 goals in 2 games is great. It's a massive improvement on what they had been doing, which had been just not scoring at all. But I think it's probably a bit early to say that they're really out of their funk. They're still very much down there in the scrap. They're a point out of relegation, which is not good. They're right down there in the form table as well, 17th, same place that they are on the actual table. They just have players. Quentin Jean still hasn't scored a goal. I think he's had 35 shots without scoring. It's a lot of that going around at Toulouse. There's a lot of players who are just doing their trying, but they just look a long way from being comfortable, and as you mentioned, that puts the pressure on the defense, and their defense was their strength for a long time. But for the better part of a year now, the end of last season, the start of this season, they haven't been able to score goals. That's put pressure on the defense. You see mistakes coming out of guys like Issa Diop, who you just didn't see these sorts of mistakes before because they're under so much more pressure. And yes, the attack is taking pressure off them the last couple of games, but let's just see, really.
Yeah, I think it might have helped by, especially in that Bordeaux game, they played Kawzak and Mbula in midfield, which is as defensive as you possibly can get, really, in all honesty. And they are missing a couple of players as well. They've missed Alexis Blin over the last couple of games. Well, he missed the midweek game, and Jimmy Durmaz has missed some time as well. They just seem to be missing a bit of creative flair, don't they, Jeremy? I mean, we mentioned it in the summer that they losing someone like Oscar Trejo, they maybe needed someone in midfield to help there. They've not done that. They brought in Gradel, but they still seem to want to play Jean as a winger. It's not really working. Toivonen starting, and he did score in midweek, but it doesn't really gel with Delors and the formation as well. Does Durmaz maybe need Dupraz, sorry. Yeah, I will always get those mixed up, I think. But do you think Dupraz needs a different kind of plan for this team? I mean, they have such a good young defence that when they're not constantly under pressure in games, can help them a lot, but they're under threat a lot because this team just doesn't know what to do offensively.
Yeah, to be honest, I've never been 100% convinced about Dupraz. I've always seen him as a bit of a sort of Kevin Keegan, Stuart Pearce type, who's great when the backs are really against the wall, and that famous sort of passionate team talk before that great escape a couple of seasons back, and lots of blood and thunder, and good at getting your players to sort of bleed for the cause, which I think works for sort of the odd matches when it's win or bust kind of thing. But I've never been convinced about him as a manager who can really kind of mount a decent, sustained campaign of any kind. And with the wealth of talented young players that Toulouse have, I do think they should be doing better than they are. And yeah, I'm not convinced about some of the choices he makes. There's some players like Mbula, it was kind of, it was probably a good gamble to take because everyone knows that he's got the talent and hasn't really been showing it the last couple of years. But I don't think he's got the best out of him yet. Corentin-Jean, another one who we spoke about, it seems like years ago now already that he was going to be this great talent, and it hasn't really clicked. It does still feel that they're a little bit Delors reliant going forward, but I suppose to an extent you have to say, well, that's the fault of Dupraz and those above him for not bringing in a little bit more creativity during the summer. On the basis that I think he's good when the chips are down, maybe it kind of suits them that they are sort of in the relegation dogfight, because I think that's when he comes into his own. He has already at Toulouse, he did at Evian as well. But I do find it disappointing because, similarly to Strasbourg, Toulouse it's not a football town, it's a rugby town, but still they should have a great infrastructure there. They've been in Ligue 1 for a hell of a long time now. They've got some good players there, and for years now it's felt like they should be kicking on and becoming real challengers, at least in cups, maybe if not for the league, but cups and European places. And every year it just seems to be this damp squib when you expect so much more.
Yeah, it's a real worry given the talent that they have done over the last sort of 5 years or so, that they've never really churned out more than sort of a daring glance at sort of mid-table. And you start thinking as well, if they start losing players in the summer, especially, there was a big offer for Issa Diop supposedly from RB Leipzig last summer. Someone's bound to come in for him again, and you start thinking that Lafont's going to attract eyes from elsewhere sooner rather than later as well, with his talent as well. Once they're stripped away from them, then they start to struggle. You think, is the next generation in line? Do they have plans for extra players to come in there and replacements? You don't feel like it, and then you start thinking, well, are they looking down rather than up again? And I agree, it's never really quite clicked enough for me under Pascal Dupraz to convince me that he can do much more than keep them afloat, really. But it's a tough one, really. I'm going for Strasbourg in this one. I think they've been excellent over the last couple of weeks, and I fancy them to not be as easy as it probably was against Bordeaux. I mean, they won't fall over like the sort of Bordeaux defence did for them, at least. Anyway, I think I'll go for a 1-0 win here for the home side. What do you think, Sam?
I'd love to see Toulouse to do something. That's where my wife's from, and so I'm a bit Toulouse on myself, but I don't see it. I just haven't seen anything really to instill much hope. I think Strasbourg will probably win this. It'll be tight. I think 1-0 Strasbourg.
Jess?
I'm with Sam in that I don't think these two 2-0 wins actually count for that much. Coupe de la Ligue against Bordeaux was more or less a formality, and I think the 2-0 last week actually was a little bit flattering. It came from a ridiculous penalty, as in it was a penalty but ridiculously done or given away, and very lucky big deflection. So I'm still not convinced about them. I think 2-0 Strasbourg.
Yeah, it just feels like that the home side, especially on such a crest of a wave at the moment, that they'll sort of sweep away a Toulouse side that have just still not really convincing. And you start to think towards January, maybe in this winter break, maybe they decide to do something to change that. Let's wait and see. On Sunday, there's a couple of interesting games, and we'll come to the really great one that finishes our weekend later on. But Nice-Bordeaux sounds a lot more blockbuster at the start of the season than it possibly does now. Although, in fairness to the home side, they have improved a little bit over recent weeks after what was an absolutely abysmal October, at least. Anyway, let's start with them then, Sam. The last couple of weeks, the results, admittedly, against Toulouse and Metz are a little bit favoursome because of how those teams are playing. But a victory over Nantes, it gives them a little bit of hope. And one thing we briefly mentioned on the Monday show is, and I want to mention again, is that man who grabs all the headlines, which is Mario Balotelli. There is news that in the papers that the club might not be able to hold on to him should they not reach European competition again this season. And while they're in 8th now, at least they might have a chance at it. But admittedly, in a strange season for them, the Italian's probably been their best player, or at least most important.
Yeah, and you're right. It has been a strange season. It feels like they've had about 3 or 4 periods already in less than half a season. They were good, they were terrible again, they were good again, they were terrible again. It's been an odd one, and you're right. Balotelli has been just incredibly important. I mean, it is sort of the ultimate cliche, but it's just all about goals, and Balotelli has done what needed to be done. He scored goals. He's made things happen for players around him, and it's so hard to get away from the character that is Balotelli and look at him as an actual footballer, but he has been really important and really useful. And this has been the best spell of his career. This has been the most prolific he's been at any club. This is perhaps what we kind of hoped for when we saw the emergence of a young Balotelli. You kind of thought maybe this is what you'll get out of him, a guy who can kind of do everything, a guy who's big and strong and fast, but also clever and can make things happen. And he bollocks people when they make mistakes, and you're seeing a different player now, I think, at Nice. And yeah, he is just incredibly important. Seri, arguably, perhaps still the most important. We see when he's out, the form goes out the window. But certainly Balotelli right up there as well.
Yeah, and it's good to see Seri slowly getting back to the form we should know really from him. He's not been at his very best this season, but it does look like he's growing in power. And to see another player that's sort of attributed to their uprising form and has played more in recent weeks, especially now he's not injured at least, is Alain Saint-Maximin as well, who's sort of maybe give them a little bit of a spark, a little bit of pace, something they were really, really missing at the start of the season. Was an injection of something. I mean, it does help that having someone like him on the field does help. But do you think that Nice, Jez, can still be European contenders in this season, in this bizarre sort of season we're having? Because they are now back up to 8th, which admittedly is at least better than they were before. But they're not far away from a lot of teams around them in those sort of 4th, 5th positions. They're only sort of 2 points off Rennes. They're about 4 points off Nantes. There's a big gap then to the sort of Champions League places, at least a sort of 4th at least anyway. But 5th is an achievable goal in this sort of amalgamation of a season at the moment for these mid-table sides.
I think so. I think, yeah, the top 4 look like they've got too big a gap to overcome now. But Nice haven't changed that much in terms of personnel from last year, and yeah, Seri's gone off a bit, but I think that Balotelli, I think, has grown in stature from last year. For a start, he's kind of being risked more in away matches, and he's scoring away from home, whereas I think last year he was pretty much only allowed to do stuff at home. His discipline has improved. I think he's had 1 red card, and it was a really harsh one. So I think things are going a lot better forward-wise. Player is sort of tentatively coming back into a bit of form, which has been tough for him after a long injury. And Cyprien hopefully will, he's just coming back now, so hopefully he can, as quickly as possible, get back to last year's form. And so, I think things are looking good for them there. I think their main problem this year has felt like it's been the defence. That bit has been very much changed from last year. Cardinal's lost a lot of form, Dante's lost a lot of form, and then the other 3 starting defenders from last year left in the summer. So it's taken a while to try to sort that end of the pitch up. But if they can, I personally think they are a better team than Montpellier, Rennes, and Nantes above them. And I think if they can play to their full potential, I think I'd make them favourites to finish 5th.
Which seems absolutely absurd when you think that, 3-4 match days ago, they were sort of flirting with the bottom of the table. Crazy moments we're having. But one team that is flirting with the bottom of the table at the moment is Bordeaux, who've been in an awful run of form, and we alluded to it earlier. It's 1 win in their last 9. Their win coming against another maligned team in Saint-Etienne that seems like a misnomer more than anything, Sam. It's just slowly got worse and worse and worse for Jocelyn Gourvenec so far this season. He can't really work out how to fix it as well. You start thinking as well that in January, teams might be sniffing around Malcolm to see if they maybe can get a cut price deal on him if they are struggling. There's some real worries for the lazy old Dan, and maybe, even though we've always thought that Jocelyn Gourvenec was that sort of next generation of French coach, maybe he's under real threat now as well.
I mean, I think you have to be. For a team with the quality that Bordeaux have, and we talk about it all the time, but you can rattle off a list of players at Bordeaux who would start for basically all but but PSG and maybe one or two of the others in this league. This is a far too good a team to be playing this poorly, but he's not got this team set up properly at all. They don't score goals. We talked about that earlier in the season when they were at least not conceding many. They were keeping games tight and they were winning, but without really impressing. I mean, the phrase sans briller, without shining, is one that the French press use a lot after sort of a dour, scrappy win. And it was game after game for Bordeaux. It was just sans briller, because they haven't shone at all. And now that the defense has not been doing anything, and one clean sheet in 10 games, that coming, as you say, against Saint-Etienne, which doesn't really count because of how poorly Saint-Etienne have been playing. Yeah, Gourvenec should be under pressure because this is far too talented a side to be in this trouble. They should be. We thought at the start of the season they'd be one of the teams fighting for Champions League places. Now they're a team fighting for their place in Ligue 1.
Yeah, you look at the run as well. They lost to Paris Saint-Germain at the start of it. There's a loss against Monaco there. There's a 1-0 defeat to Rennes. Okay. There's a 1-0 defeat to Coupe. All right. There's one against Amiens. You think, But then the last couple of weeks, especially, Jez, they lost very late on against Dijon, but they were pretty comfortable at one point, at least in that game. It felt like, especially when they'd gone to sort of 2-1 after Yambere, especially scoring immediately after Dijon sort of equalised, you felt, right, okay, this should be a win for Bordeaux, but they collapsed in that one. And then last week, they fell apart really against Strasbourg. It was pretty awful to watch, in all honesty. It could have been 4, 5, 6 on another day had Strasbourg maybe got a little bit lucky with some shots that hit the bar, but Bordeaux didn't really create anything either. Is that was really the match that felt like the alarm bells should be absolutely ringing all the way around that stadium at the moment? That something needs to change if something doesn't happen between now and the winter break, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with Sam that on paper, certainly sort of midfield and forward line, they seem spot for choice. At the start of the season, I was concerned that they didn't really have a striker, and I thought De Preville was a brilliant signing that would really sort of take them on to the next level. That hasn't worked out, but still there's talent there, and it's bizarre that they seem so reliant on Malcolm. In defence, it was always a concern. I think any defence that needs to play an ageing midfielder as starting centre back is going to be concerning anyway. But yeah, the defence has looked dodgy all season. Earlier in the season, it didn't matter because Malcolm was playing so well, because Kamano, I'm not absolutely convinced about, was doing an okay role helping him out, that kind of thing. But now the goals have dried up. You can rely on that defence to concede, and yeah, without Malcolm or someone at the other end to kind of cover up those mistakes, they're losing each week. And yeah, while some of those defeats have been just by the odd goal, it did feel the Strasbourg one felt different. That felt a sort of lost the dressing room kind of defeat, and certainly the fans were furious. And I think after the match, the president and Gourvenec tried to speak to some of the fan groups, and Gourvenec was adamant that he's not going to change anything. I hope they sort it out, because I particularly feel any affinity with Bordeaux, but I really like Gourvenec, and I still think he's a talented coach, but something's gone wrong there. And yeah, whereas beforehand it just felt like a bad run that they could come out of at some point, the Strasbourg one felt like it was a lot more serious than that.
Yeah, feels like a real worry. I mean, I've been banging on about defence all season. It is not good enough to get to a European level, and that's more than plain to see with the last couple of games, especially that awful Terrier goal. But the midfield is confused. He's not decided what he wants to play there. Attack, they don't look right. I mean, De Preville's come in and out of the side because he doesn't know whether to start him. He starts Mendy. Mendy does relatively average as well. Maybe he scores a goal, so keeps him in, but then it doesn't work for the next game. He just needs to try and mix something up. It feels like he just needs to try and shake something out of them at the moment. He's tried to Depraville out wide. It's half worked, but his system doesn't really fit with how he wants to play. I've pondered whether maybe he takes out a midfield and plays Depraville as sort of a number 10 behind someone like Mendy, so they've got even more attacking options to try and create more. It just seems like they're stuck somewhere that they can't really get out of on the moment. And at the moment, you don't really want to be facing someone like with that aging defence that's slow, plodding. I'm just looking at Alisson Player and Alan Saint-Maximin, and Balotelli's probably weighing them up, seeing how strong they are, because it could be a really heavyweight battle between him and Toulon, and one that looks more like Toulon's going to be the 45-year-old returning from a 2-year absence, and Mario Balotelli may be looking like an Anthony Joshua at the moment, really. Sam, what do you think in this one?
I think you really have to worry for Bordeaux in this game. I think what you've just laid out there, I mean, it's kind of all you need to know. That back line against this Nice forward line, I mean, 3 just sprinters, and Saint-Maximin coming into form, the trickery and the taking people on and just trying to roast people. This whole front line will just roast this Bordeaux back line. I can't imagine Bordeaux getting anything out of this game. I think Nice might thrash them. I think it might be like 4-0.
Jez?
I'm just going to go 2-0, but I agree that I can't see anything but a Nice win. And yeah, I really worry for Gourvenac.
I think it's a 2-0 win. I really think if it does end up something like you mentioned there, Sam, if it is something like a 4-0 defeat, that might be the end of Gourvenac. Even if he does maybe get a result in that last game, they might give him at least until the midweek. But I think he might be a dead man walking if he gets a real pummeling in this one again, given that Nice have had, or at least still achievably get backable, if it's the right word to really say, because they're only 3 points off them, so a victory does put them right next to them. But again, then if a defeat pushes them further away, and when they do need to start picking up points, it's a real worry. We move on to the final game of the weekend, and it's a real barnstormer, really, and it's Lyon versus Marseille, 2nd versus 4th, 2 teams on equal points, and be desperate to beat each other in these kind of big games. In fact, they have the same record at the moment: 10 wins, 5 draws, 2 losses each. We'll start with the home side. Sam, in Lyon, who had a pretty poor midweek at least, and they've been indifferent the last couple of weeks. They've maybe, some would argue, got lucky against Amiens with a 2-1 result where they came back from behind, but they didn't play particularly well in that one. They're very grateful for Aouar to get those 2 goals. Against Caen, Caen played reasonably well, and then before then they'd lost to Lille as well in that strange midweek result. Is it maybe a case of them taking the foot off the gas a little bit from that excellent run that we saw sort of October, November time? Or is this a sign of fatigue with this team and the amount of times that they've played the sort of same players? Or is this just sort of the natural dip and ebbs and flows of a season that you would see, that a team that is successful tends to get these close dip wins when they need them in the season, when they're not playing at their top level?
I think there's a few different things at play here. One is, I think they maybe perhaps sort of started to read their own headlines a little bit. The way they were just blowing teams away. I mean, that first half against Nice, they must have sort of thought themselves champions already. The derby win that we mentioned, the thrashing of Saint-Etienne, these sorts of things maybe took their eyes off the ball a little bit. Also, you have to remember this is such a young team with a lot of newer players. A lot of the key players in this side have only been there a year or less, and so I think you kind of have to expect with very young players that it's kind of hard to expect the same level out of them week after week. We mentioned Aouar. I mean, he's a kid. He was sort of nowhere 18 months ago, and now he's a key player in this team, and he's getting linked to Barcelona. And this team is full of young, really incredibly talented players like that, but you maybe can't expect the same performance week after week out of them. And then the other thing, perhaps the biggest thing, is the drop-in form of Nabil Fekir. The last international break, when he finally got called up by France again, at that point, the form he was in, we talked about it here, he was the player of the league. He was the best player in the league so far, and he hasn't been since. His form really has dropped off, and he's missed a couple of games, and he's just not been himself. I know Genesio was defending him, but he really hasn't been the same Fekir who was just tearing teams apart, and that's a big part of it as well. So there's a lot of different factors why Lyon maybe not quite in the form they were, but as you mentioned, they're still there. They're still the same number of points as Marseille, and you still have to think that they're right in this battle for those Champions League places.
It's just been a little bit of a dip recently, but they are admittedly still getting points. Jez, I mean, looking at the team at the moment, we've mentioned Fekir, he's dropped out, but one player that's pretty obviously missing is Bertrand Traore, and Maxwell Cornet's played in his stead. The sort of switch at the weekend when they brought on Ndombele and Aouar went further out wide sort of gave them a little bit of extra energy with Depay not quite playing as well. Is the Burkina Faso international missing a real miss for them in the terms of balance of that front four, or do you think there's more to it than that?
I don't think he was really clicking and playing that brilliantly. There was that one match, was it the Dijon match, where he scored a brilliant free kick and he looked like he was about to sort of click then. I think for a lot of, what Sam said about can't remember which team he said it about now, about Saint-Etienne. I think that that kind of applies to so many teams this year. I think Saint-Etienne, the first few matches where they were winning, but they weren't winning well. The Nantes have been doing well, Saint-Etienne. Marseille have been doing well, Saint-Etienne. And Lyon, judging by a lot of Lyon fans, even what they've been saying, even during their good run, they haven't been entirely convincing. And certainly in terms of the forward line, whether it's Cornet or Traore on the right, Depay on the left, Diaz, until that fantastic pass for Aouar's winner the other day, generally looks like he's not interested in passing to anyone. There have been issues there, but they've been able, I think, to kind of cover it up because they're all so talented that if three of them are off form, there is a chance that one of the others could still sort of win the match for them on their own. And I think in a way that bodes well for them because without really clicking for a lot of the season, they are still up there, second, third place. And yeah, during that time, Toussaint has been amazingly consistent and reliable. Aouar has grown already into a fantastic player. And yeah, it's true that Fekir his form has dropped off a lot since earlier in the season. But I don't think it's affected them too much. I think from memory, only that Lille result, which was a bit of a weird outlier, has been really poor in recent weeks. And I think that considering that it was more or less a kind of rebuilt forward line, the fact that they're still up there as they all get used to each other is a very good sign. But I do think that possibly right wing is an issue because Traore is not clicking and Cornet is certainly not necessarily the Lyon fans' favourites. As great as he was the other day with I think a goal and assist against Nice, I'm not sure Lyon fans would want to be relying on him week in, week out.
Yeah, especially given his comments in the summer as well, where he looked like he was edging for the exit door at that moment. I would really like to see Lyon try something different at the moment with Traore. I think that while it didn't seem like he was clicking much, his pace and his ability to get in behind is something they're possibly missing at the moment. Cornet's maybe a bit more willing to try and get the ball and try and do that. I would like them to try and play a three-man midfield with those exciting midfielders that are consistent at the moment. That's Toussaint, Aouar and Ndombele. It won't really outbalance the team if they maybe move Fekir possibly centrally. I mean, the only issue with that is it's either Fekir plays centrally or out wide or Diaz does one or the other, and it maybe unsettles them a little bit. But they are really struggling for consistency, at least anyway, even though they are still nicking games, even if it is late on. Maybe try something a little bit different, especially in a game against a team like Marseille, who are... I mean, we've mentioned a couple of times on the show that they've not really convinced massively this season, Sam, but you start looking at the sort of results they've had in the last couple of months, and they've not lost in Ligue 1 since that game against Rennes back in week 5, which is a terrific run. I mean, there's some questionable ones in there. I know we mentioned the Montpellier game was a lucky one. There was a couple of decisions in that one that went their way. They got the point at Bordeaux as well late on. They probably deserved that one really, but it was tough at the moment. But in between those, and then that same against the Lille result as well, where they probably nicked that one, but they win 5-0 at Caen with that one. They beat Guingamp, they beat Metz in that run. Yes, that's almost a formality as the Saint-Etienne win last week. But they're right up there at the moment and in decent form with players starting to grow into this team as well, which makes this contest at the weekend ever more interesting, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, this Marseille team, I think we maybe didn't expect too much out of them after sort of the window closed and the big names that had been expected didn't arrive. You know, it was a bit of the Marseille Pensioners Club with the old players that they brought in, and it was not much youth, not much excitement, but it is still a very, very solid team. And you know, you look when you watch the players that shine week after week. It's Luis Gustavo has been fantastic, just a great signing. Florian Thauvin is just, again, I mean, I think he's gone up another level in the last couple of weeks where it's just been excellent again. Some of these less heralded players like Sambo and Gisa, it's just that there's a lot of grit in this Marseille team. They really bust a gut to win games, and to imagine after that Rennes defeat when they were just catastrophically bad. I mean, that was just an incredible performance for how poor they were to lose so badly to that Rennes side, who themselves were playing very poorly. To go from then to now without losing a game is remarkable, and it says a lot about this group of players that perhaps a little bit shorter on quality than the other teams that are battling for second place. You know, they arguably have fewer stars. They definitely have fewer stars than Lyon and Monaco, but the fact that they're up there and they're fighting, and they're fighting for these late points and late wins, and it's really something to be admired that this Marseille team, you know, they are a genuine contender for the Champions League. And I think if you'd said that when the transfer window closed, people probably wouldn't have believed you.
The really satisfying thing about that win at the weekend against Saint-Etienne, where again it could have been 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. It could have been anything really. Had Marseille stuck away a few of the chances. They hit the post so many times. I think that the goal frames at the Velodrome will be glad that they're not there this weekend, at least anyway. But the real pleasing thing, and I think this speaks to a lot of Ligue 1 fans, Jez, is Valais-Germain's double. I mean, he's struggled quite a bit this season, especially in the league anyway, to score. He's scored in Europa League qualifiers, but hasn't scored for a long while. But to get that double when they're desperate for a striker to get goals as well, and we all know that Germain has the experience of doing that in Ligue 1, it was really pleasing to see him finally. You could see the weight lift off his shoulders, couldn't you, when that first one went in? It felt like maybe now he might be the man for them.
I think he's a fantastic player. I'm really pleased to see him on the score sheet. I'm still not convinced that playing him alone up front is using him to the best of his ability. I think he'd be better with another striker. I think he's, you know, one of those very intelligent, I guess, kind of maybe a Teddy Sheringham type that works very well off someone. You know, like he did, I guess, with Falcao at times last year, using his intelligence to put other people in good positions. But yeah, very, very pleased with him. I've made recently a few enemies amongst Marseille fans because I am totally bemused as to how they're up there. The only time I've seen them play well this season is against PSG. And I think, you know, while it says a lot about their fight and, you know, possibly the fact that Campos is one of their better players this year, says everything you need to know about the type of Marseille team that we've got this year. I think, sadly, it might say a bit more about the quality of Ligue 1 this year, and it really does pain me to say it because I really, apart from Gustavo and Thauvin, very occasionally Sanson, I'm just not sure what there is in that team. And, you know, I think they got lucky against Bordeaux. They got extremely lucky against Montpellier. So on paper, it's a fantastic run of form. But I'm just really unconvinced about them. And they'll probably go and beat Lyon 4-0 now. But
knowing your look, at least. Anyway, I think you made a good point with Germain there that he needs someone around him. And I always think back to the time where he scored his most goals in Ligue 1, and that was with Nice, and that was with Hatem Ben Arfa being so close to him so often and giving him service. And I think at the weekend when they played Thauvin and Payet and Lopez and Sanson in this side from the off, they had more players around him and closer to him at crucial stages, and he had more room to manoeuvre into the attacking little positions he loves to go into the corners where he tend to drag defenders and not running out of the box that he did so often when playing as a two-man up front. I think that makes him such a better player. I really hope that Rudy Garcia has the has the nerve, especially away at home, to try and do the same kind of thing and play enough players around Germain and be brave in this kind of game to give him the service that does get him the goals. Because if they can, that makes an enormous difference when you think that the midfield is getting better with Gustavo in front of them. The defence is not really been tested in the last couple of weeks as much, but they are slowly sort of gathering a little bit of form, especially Jordan Marvey at left back. They just need a couple of things to click. You also think maybe in January, if they spot a couple of deals here and there for younger players as well to build on it, it could be a really, really interesting time for Marseille. But let's get some predictions to finish this one off. Jez, what do you think?
I feel like I've probably made a bit of a mess of myself. I feel like Lyon should win, and if there's any justice in the world, Lyon will win. But I think it will be 2-2 with Marseille benefiting from the dodgy refereeing decisions that apparently they never, ever, ever get.
Yeah,
according to their fans.
Where has this myth come from? I don't get this at all. Sam, what do you think?
Oh, this game really, it just could be anything. But I think ultimately, man for man, Lyon are a much better team. You'd almost take every one of Lyon's players in every position over any of Marseille's players. And in that context, also, it's at home for Lyon. I think you have to back Lyon to snap out of this sort of indifferent run and to win this and win it well would really be a statement that they're here to stay and that they're looking at that second place as really theirs. And I'm going to back them to do it. I think it's going to be difficult. I think 3-2 to Bordeaux. To Lyon.
Yeah, this feels like Marseille's water test, doesn't it? After the last couple of weeks, that they've had a couple of lucky results. They've had a great run in terms of not losing as well. Obviously, they played Monaco very early this season, but getting the draw where they probably should have won against Paris Saint-Germain as well would really give them a boost. But I agree. I feel like this would just be the one that Lyon maybe sort of, I don't necessarily say dominate, but I think they'll just have too much for the Lyon defense. I think it comes down to that. The defending from Lyon is better. They've got a much more solid base to go from. I do fear for Marseille if Gustavo does play. He's sort of playing more as a playmaker in a sense of sort of orchestrating things a little bit more rather than being defensive. My worry is maybe he's caught out, especially with Nabil Fekir behind him. This is the ideal game for him to get back into form. I'm going for a 2-1 win in this one. It's going to be a good one, though. I really fancy this game to be a bit... If they really want to go for it and they both really want second, they'll go for it, and it could be a really, really exciting game. But we've seen that go belly up too often in Ligue 1 to get my hopes up too much, at least. Anyway, that's all for this week. My thanks to Sam, Jez, and all of you listening at home. Join us for the main show on Monday, and we will also have a similar main show to close out the end of the season on Thursday as well. So do join us for that as well. But for now, enjoy your final 2017 weekend of football.